What did a chicken farmer in 1935 know about getting 500 eggs a year that most backyard keepers today have completely forgotten? Walt Hensley, 71 years old, keeps chickens on 14 acres outside of Morristown, Tennessee, on land that his grandfather farmed before him. He produces roughly 520 eggs and 190 pounds of processed chicken meat per year from a mixed flock on a feed budget that runs about $38 per month. He has never bought a commercial dewormer. He has never bought a probiotic supplement. He has never bought an oyster shell product that came in a plastic bag with a branded label on it. Walt's grandfather kept chickens the same way. And Walt's grandfather's grandfather kept chickens the same way before that. What Walt is running is not a nostalgic hobby. It is a management system that predates the commercial feed industry by generations, and that, dollar for dollar, still outperforms it. The commercial feed and supplement industry did something remarkable starting in the 1950s. It convinced 3 generations of chicken keepers that the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of poultry keeping was obsolete and should be replaced with products sold in 50-pound bags. Some of those products are legitimately useful. A lot of them are solutions to problems that didn't exist before people stopped using the older approach. The 25 methods on this list are not alternative medicine. They are what farmers used when the only alternative was no eggs and no meat. Most have documented mechanisms that modern science has confirmed. A few are still debated. I'll tell you which are which. Near the end, I'm covering the single management practice Walt credits for eliminating his January production cliff entirely, the one that requires no feed change, no lighting equipment, no infrastructure investment of any kind, and that his grandfather taught him standing at a fence line in 1983 in about 4 minutes. Start with gut health, because the single most expensive thing the commercial supplement industry sells is a replacement for what your grandparents got for free. Sour milk and buttermilk in the mash was standard practice on every working farm before refrigeration made dairy surplus a rarity. The mechanism is identical to what commercial probiotic supplements do. Lactic acid bacteria colonize the digestive tract, crowd out pathogenic organisms, and improve nutrient absorption efficiency. The difference is that sour milk is free if you have dairy animals, costs about $1.50 per gallon at the store if you don't, and works as a twice-weekly mash addition at about a cup per bird. The commercial probiotic supplement industry did not invent this benefit. It packaged and sold it back to the people who used to get it off the stove for nothing. Whey from home cheese or butter, making operates on the same principle from the dairy side. Whey runs roughly 12% protein, is high in B vitamins, and delivers live lactobacillus cultures in a form that pours directly into the mash pail without any preparation. Garlic in the drinking water is a different mechanism entirely. Allicin, the compound released when raw garlic is crushed, is documented in veterinary literature, published by the Journal of Applied Poultry Research as producing measurable antimicrobial activity against E. coli and Salmonella strains common in poultry at concentrations equivalent to 1 crushed clove per gallon of water. Old-timers did this before introducing new birds and during periods of illness in the flock. It costs about 20 cents per week. Blackstrap molasses rounds out this category. The lowest grade byproduct of sugar refining, blackstrap runs high in iron, potassium, calcium, and B vitamins at about $3 per pound, and was used at 1 tablespoon per gallon of water as a general recovery tonic after shipping stress, after hard molt, and before winter. The mild laxative effect was used intentionally by old-timers to clear impacted crops and to flush intestinal parasite loads during the warm months. Here is the commercial accumulation that matters on this category alone. A commercial probiotic supplement for a 12-hen flock runs roughly $18 per month. The sour milk, whey, and garlic rotation that produces the same result costs about $2 per month on a property that has any dairy operation going. Over 5 years, that's a $960 difference in your pocket on one product category, and that's one category out of 25. The commercial supplement industry exists because it found a way to sell you back the knowledge that transferred for free between generations for centuries. That knowledge transfer broke down somewhere in the 1960s when commercial feed became cheap enough and convenient enough that most farm families stopped maintaining the practices that predated it. The methods on this list didn't become obsolete. They became invisible. Parasites were the most consistent production problem on pre-commercial farms, and the solutions that survived were the ones that worked reliably across different climates and conditions. Pumpkin and squash seeds as a natural dewormer work through cucurbitacin, the bitter compound concentrated in the seeds that paralyzes the musculature of intestinal roundworms without killing the gut flora that chemical dewormers damage as collateral. Cornell University's poultry extension has published on the cucurbitacin mechanism. Old-timers fed whole raw seeds in fall when squash was harvested, roughly a small handful per bird, once or twice in October, free if you grow squash, and the timing aligns naturally with harvest. Wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, was the standard nest box deterrent for mites and lice before synthetic pesticides. The volatile thujone compounds in fresh or dried wormwood repel Dermanisis gallinae, the red mite that feeds on roosting birds at night, at concentrations that are well below any toxic threshold for poultry. It grows freely as a perennial herb across most of the continental U.S. You cut it, you dry it, you put it in the nest box material, and replace it monthly. Tobacco stems, not leaves, from any cigar shop where they're discarded for free, contain nicotine alkaloids that kill mites and lice on contact at concentrations that don't affect adult birds. Place them under the nest box material rather than exposed where birds might eat them directly. This is an adult nest box application only, not for brooders. The herbal nest box pack, lavender, rosemary, mint, and lemon balm, either fresh or dried, addresses a different layer of the same problem. The volatile terpene compounds from these herbs at nest box concentrations have documented antimicrobial and insect repellent properties, and the respiratory benefit for brooding hens in an enclosed nest box has been observed consistently enough that it was a standard practice across American farm literature from the 1880s through the 1940s. Grow them in a kitchen garden, harvest, dry, and replace monthly alongside the wormwood. The combined effect of wormwood, tobacco stems, and herbal pack in a nest box is a parasite control system that costs nothing to maintain on a property where any of these plants are growing. The supplement category splits cleanly into two groups: things that address nutritional gaps in a grain-based ration, and things that address energy demands in cold weather. Both groups were solved without a trip to the farm store. Cayenne pepper in winter mash is one of the most counterintuitive methods on this list, until you understand that birds don't have mammalian capsaicin receptors. They don't taste the heat at all. What capsaicin does in birds is stimulate peripheral circulation, which helps maintain core body temperature in cold-stressed birds without pulling energy from egg production. Old-timers in the Upper South and the Midwest started mixing dried red pepper into the mash in October at about a quarter teaspoon per bird per feeding. Dried red pepper runs about $2 per pound at a restaurant supply store, and a pound lasts months at that dose rate. Dried salt cod or any dried fish was the winter protein solution before commercial high-protein pellets existed. Dried fish delivers complete amino acid profiles, including methionine, the specific amino acid that plant-based layer rations are chronically short on, and the deficiency shows up as soft shells and reduced production. Soak it overnight to reduce the salt content, crumble it into the mash, about $4 per pound at most grocery stores, and a small amount per bird covers the methionine gap that $22 bags of layer pellets sometimes don't fully address. Beef tallow or lard in winter mash addresses energy density directly. A hen maintaining core body temperature at 15 degrees Fahrenheit is burning calories that would otherwise go to egg production. 1 tablespoon of rendered fat per bird per day during the coldest months provides the thermal maintenance energy so that feed protein stays directed at production rather than heat. Free if you're rendering your own from processing, which Walt does from his guinea hogs every November. Activated charcoal from hardwood rather than lighter fluid-treated products adsorbs aflatoxins and mycotoxins from stored grain before they reach the gut. Old-timers used crushed raw wood charcoal from the fireplace. If you store grain in a humid climate like the Gulf Coast or eastern Tennessee, and you've ever had a flock go through a period of vague production, drops in immune sluggishness without an obvious cause, subclinical mycotoxin exposure from stored grain is frequently the culprit. A small amount of hardwood charcoal crushed fine and mixed monthly into the mash is the cheap insurance policy. And agricultural limestone flour, not garden lime and not hydrated lime, runs 36 to 38% calcium carbonate, works identically to commercial oyster shell for calcium supplementation, and costs about $8 per 50-pound bag, roughly the size of a large bag of garden mulch at a hardware store, compared to $18 for an equivalent volume of branded oyster shell. Walt has never bought branded oyster shell in 50 years of keeping chickens. Land management methods are where the gap between pre-commercial and modern practice is widest, and where the production efficiency difference is most dramatic. Comfrey as a standing protein crop is the single most underused perennial on any homestead that keeps chickens. Dried comfrey leaf runs 20 to 25% crude protein, according to published nutritional analysis from the Henry Doubleday Research Association in the UK, grows back after cutting 4 to 6 times per season from established root crowns, tolerates partial shade and clay soil, and from one planting lasts 20 years with no annual replanting cost. It is a permanently installed protein crop that predates the commercial feed industry by centuries in British and American farm practice. A 10 by 10 foot planting, roughly the footprint of a small backyard storage shed, provides meaningful supplemental protein to a 12-hen flock through the entire growing season. Succession planting for chicken forage addresses the problem that most people solve with commercial feed. The zero-cost protein season ends in early July, when the spring planting ripens all at once. Stagger sunflower, amaranth, and field corn plantings by 3 weeks from April through June, roughly one interval between full moon cycles. The result is a rolling forage harvest that extends from July through November rather than a single peak in midsummer. One planting of sunflowers and amaranth from Baker Creek heirloom seeds costs about $6 and produces forage across a 5-month window rather than 3 weeks. Running chickens behind cattle, pigs, or horses is the practice Joel Salatin formalized as the eggmobile, and it predates him by roughly 200 years. Large animals pass fly larvae and undigested grain in their manure. Chickens following behind in a rotation cycle harvest both protein sources while simultaneously spreading and breaking down the manure. Even 2 to 3 days per week of rotation access to a paddock grazed by other livestock produces a measurable reduction in purchased feed cost. And the end-of-season garden rotation eliminates an expensive step in spring garden preparation simultaneously. 2 to 3 weeks of chicken access to the spent garden after fall harvest eliminates overwintering pest larvae, tills the top 2 inches of soil roughly the depth of a standard trowel insertion, and deposits a nitrogen-rich manure layer. The chickens get protein from soil insects. The garden gets prepared for spring at zero labor cost. Old-timers planned the garden fence layout specifically to allow this rotation, and it shows up consistently in American farm management guides from 1880 through 1945. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribe. Every week I cover practical backyard food production with real mechanisms and real numbers from working setups that have been tested across multiple seasons. Nothing to sell, just what the flock actually shows. Flock management methods from this era were built around one principle that the modern backyard chicken world almost never applies. Not every bird earns its feed. Trap nesting to identify and cull non-layers is the method that produces the most skepticism until the feed math is applied directly. A trap nest is a nesting box that latches shut when a hen enters to lay, holding her until you check and record which bird laid before releasing her. Penn State Extension ran formal calculations on this practice in a commercial layer context, and the numbers translate to backyard scale. The bottom 20% of producers in a flock consume 20% of the feed for zero production return. On a 12-hen flock on Nutrena NatureWise at $22 per bag, the non-producing birds cost roughly $6 per month in pure feed waste. Over a 3-year production cycle, that's $216 in feed that produced nothing. Walt has run trap nests every spring for the last 30 years, identifies the bottom 2 or 3 producers by mid-April, and those birds go in the freezer. His per dozen egg cost is lower than any flock of equal size that doesn't cull. Forced molt by nutrition reduction is the other management practice that draws the most resistance from new keepers, and I want to be direct about the welfare context before explaining the mechanism. Withdrawing layer ration for 5 to 7 days and substituting whole corn or low-protein scratch triggers a rapid, controlled molt that resets the reproductive follicle cycle. This was a standard late summer practice on every serious egg operation before commercial methods replaced it, and it remains legal and standard on small farm operations. The flock comes back into lay within 6 to 8 weeks with a refreshed follicle count and a synchronized production timeline. Old-timers did it annually in August to ensure the flock entered winter in a productive rather than declining cycle. Walt does it in late July. His flock hits peak winter production in October rather than declining through it. Pine tar was the wound management standard before antibiotic ointments existed. It's antifungal, antibacterial, and its dark color discourages further pecking by flock mates who are attracted to the red color of wounds. Still sold at Tractor Supply Company for about $6, a can that lasts for years. And the mineral clay geophagy station is the method most likely to generate skepticism until the mechanism is understood. Chickens engage in deliberate geophagy, intentional soil eating, to access trace minerals including iron, selenium, and zinc that grain rations don't reliably supply. A box of iron-rich red clay or a mineral-rich subsoil from a local construction site, about the size of a standard shoebox, provides the same trace mineral access that commercial trace mineral pack supplements sell at $15 per bag. Walt keeps a clay box in the run year-round and has never bought a trace mineral supplement. He refills it about once a month from the red clay cut along the creek bank at the edge of his property. A 10-minute walk and a 5-minute job with a shovel. Hatching and breeding methods on this list are where the efficiency gap between old practice and modern practice is most stark on a cost-per-bird basis. Setting a broody hen on marked eggs requires nothing except a pencil, a calendar, and a hen willing to sit. Mark your fertile eggs with a pencil before placing them under the hen. Remove any unmarked eggs daily to prevent the clutch from expanding beyond what she can cover, and track the 21-day hatch date. A well-managed broody hen achieves hatch rates of 85 to 90% in experienced hands, compared to 75 to 80% on a budget incubator, according to published comparisons in Small Farm Quarterly. Zero electricity. Zero equipment cost beyond the eggs themselves. The broody hen raises the chicks through the critical first weeks with zero brooder management, zero heat lamp risk, and zero supplemental feeding infrastructure. The one limitation worth naming. Not all breeds reliably go broody. Production-focused breeds like Australorps and black sex lynx have had the brooding instinct largely selected out of them. Heritage breeds, Buckeyes, Dominiques, Buff Orpingtons, and Old English games go broody reliably. If you want to use broody hens, select for breeds that still carry the instinct. The vinegar rinse for hatching eggs is the last preparation method from this era that's worth covering. Old-timers wipe dirty hatching eggs with diluted apple cider vinegar rather than water because water removes the bloom, the natural antimicrobial coating on the egg's surface, and opens the shell pores to bacterial penetration during incubation. Vinegar at 1 part to 10 parts water kills surface bacteria without stripping the bloom the way water does. Hatch rates on vinegar-cleaned eggs, in my experience, have run consistently higher than water-washed eggs from the same nest, though I'll acknowledge that controlled trials on this specific comparison are limited in the published literature. Table scraps, meat trimmings, bone broth, and kitchen waste in the mash close this section with the method that predates every commercial feed product on the market. Chickens are omnivores. The amino acid profiles in cooked meat scraps and bone broth supplement the methionine and lysine gaps in plant-based rations more completely than any plant protein supplement does. Cooked table scraps are legal everywhere in the United States. Some states have specific restrictions on feeding raw poultry or raw meat from unknown sources to chickens, so check your state's agricultural regulations before feeding raw. Cooked scraps from your own kitchen are universally legal and universally useful. Walt credits the succession hatching practice for eliminating his January production. Cliff is the one I want to deliver with specific numbers rather than a general description. Most backyard keepers hatch 1 batch in spring, get 1 production peak in summer, and wonder why January looks like the flock is broken. It's not broken. It's just that every bird entered a molt cycle at the same time, and there's nobody in a different production stage to carry the winter load. Walt sets eggs in 4 batches: late January, late April, late July, and late October, each batch about 90 days apart, roughly 1 full season between each set. Each batch produces a cohort of birds that reaches peak production roughly 5 to 6 months after hatch. What that timing produces is a production pipeline where at any given point in the year, at least one cohort is approaching, or at peak lay, while another cohort is molting, or in early development. In January, the birds Walt hatched in late July are at or near peak production. When they begin their first molt the following fall, the birds hatched in late October are coming into lay. The overlap between cohorts covers the production gap that most backyard flocks fall into. Walt runs approximately 24 hens at any given time across all 4 cohorts, roughly 2 small flocks sharing the same space in a managed rotation. His January egg count runs between 14 and 16 eggs per day. His previous single-batch approach, before his grandfather showed him the succession system in the early 1980s, produced 3 to 5 eggs per day in January from the same number of birds. Same feed, same coop, same breed. Different hatching calendar. That difference, about 10 to 11 eggs per day in January, works out to roughly 300 extra eggs across the winter months. At $5 per dozen at the farmer's market near Morristown, that's $125 in additional egg value from a management change that costs nothing to implement. The only investment is keeping a roosting cockerel for fertile eggs and a reliable broody hen, or a small incubator if your breeds don't go broody. The people who kept chickens before commercial feed existed didn't have a choice about whether to learn these methods. They were the methods. The knowledge on this list didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because selling you a bag every 3 weeks was more profitable than teaching you what your grandfather already knew. Pick 3 methods off this list that fit your property, your climate, and your season. Try them for 90 days, roughly 1 full production cycle, and track what changes in the feed bill and the egg count. That is the only test that actually matters on your specific setup and your specific flock. Walt's total supplement spend for a 24-bird flock runs about $480 per year, including all purchased feed, roughly $20 per bird per year. Most backyard keepers on straight commercial layer pellets spend $15 to $18 per bird per year on feed alone, for half the production output and none of the meat birds. The economics of the old system are not close. They are not comparable. The commercial feed industry is not offering a better deal. Most backyard keepers running 12 hens on straight commercial layer pellets spend $360 to $400 per year in feed alone for half the production. The math from the old approach still works. It just requires learning it one time first.